Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass.net. Now in the past, you may have seen some of the lessons that I've released on chords for bass guitar. We've looked at triads, seventh chords, added note chords, and various others. But this week we'll be taking a look at some basic fingerings for inversions, and I'll give you a little example of them in action so that you can work on them as a practice exercise. Remember, the lesson material and tab can be found over at Talkingbass.net, so just follow the link in the info below and you'll be able to play along with all of the chords that I show you. While you're there, also go check out the lesson map where you'll find nearly 300 free bass lessons on all aspects of bass playing, and they're all organised by topic for ease of navigation. Then if you want to take things further, check out the Talking Bass courses, and they cover everything from beginner bass guitar to sight reading to slap bass to ear training and everything in between. There's a Black Friday sale on right at this moment, so go check it out. Okay, so I'm going to assume a little bit of knowledge on your part for this lesson. I'm assuming a knowledge of the basic triads and seventh chords, so if you don't know them, I've got links in the info below so you can go check out those lessons first. So if I was to ask you to play a G7 chord, you would know how to play it. If I said, a D major triad, you'd know how to play that, or maybe, an F minor 7, you'd know how to play that too. So I want you to know those chords before you look at this one, so go check out those links. So let's now look at inversions. So what is an inversion? Well, an inversion is a chord played up from a note other than the root note. So let's look at the notes of the C major triad. We have C, E, and G. Okay, so C is the root note, E is the major third, and G is the perfect fourth. So that's the formula for that chord. But those chords can be laid out in a multitude of different ways. As long as we have those three notes in there, C, E, and G, it's going to be a C major of some kind. So even as an arpeggio, I could play them as C, E, G, or maybe up from the third, E, G, C, or maybe up from the fifth, G, C, E. We're laying those notes out, starting on a different note each time. And that's inversions. So let's take those notes again, C, E, G, the C major triad. So if we were to start from the root note of C, so C, E, G, that's called a root position triad, okay? Because it's got the root note there at the bottom. If we start on the third, so think about those notes, C, E, G, let's just start at E, so we then have E, G, C, so E, G, C, that's called first inversion. So that's got the third on the bottom. And then if we start on the G, so G, C, E, that is second inversion. So if we start on the root note as our lowest note, root position, then we have first inversion starting on the third and second inversion starting on the fifth. And you can continue that through the other chords. So if it was a seventh chord and you started on the seventh, then that will be third inversion. And then start on the ninth for a ninth chord and you've got fourth inversion, and you just work through like that. Now, we can play chords one note at a time as an arpeggio, and if we do that, we get a set of inversions for, let's say, the C major that looks like this. C, E, G, E, G, C, and G, C, E. But with block chords, we don't have to worry as much about that, the ordering of the upper notes. The only thing that matters is the note in the bass, okay, the lowest note in there. So if we have C major chord, and we've got the C on the bottom, it's a root position chord. However we place the other notes above, E, G, C, C, G, E, because you can have them multiple times, if they're played on a piano or whatever, or in an orchestra, let's say, it doesn't matter. It's the lowest note that we're looking at. So as long as the third is in the bass, the lowest note that you're hearing, that's first inversion. Fifth, it's going to be second inversion. So with that in mind, let's play some inversions on bass. Now, for this exercise and for this lesson, I'm just going to be building chords with the lowest note on the E string, but you can move these onto, various other strings. I'm just going to start with that root note down there so that we can spread them out a little bit above. So let's have a look at a C major chord. C, E, and G, okay? So we're going to be at the C there, 8th fret of the E string, and then we've got the E and the G above. So I'm going to spread them out. I'm going to have the G next and then the E on the top, okay? So that's just a way of laying out those notes there. So we've got C, 8th fret of the E string, and then we've got the G at the 10th fret of the A string, and then I've got the E there up at the 9th fret of the G string. Like I said, it doesn't matter how you lay them out above. You know, I've got C, G, E. You know, it doesn't have to be C, E, G, as long as that C's on the bottom. Okay, so that's a root position major chord, and as I said earlier, I cover that in various other lessons, so you should know that chord already. So now let's have a look at an inversion. Let's look at the first inversion. So we're going to build it from an E. So let's work up to the next E on the string. So let's say there at the 12th fret of the E string, so that's our E. Now we've got a C and a G to put in there. So where can we find some of those, you know, within that hand position? So a really common fingering for this would be to play the C there at the 10th fret of the D string, and then the G up there at the 12th fret of the G string. Okay, and that's a first inversion C major chord, C major triad. Okay, so we had root position, first inversion. Okay, and you can hear it has a different sound. There's a bit more suspension in there because no longer have we got that root note down on the bottom. Same chord, just first inversion. Now for the second inversion, we want the 5th as our lowest note. So that's going to be the G. So let's find a G. Let's say here at the 15th fret of the E string, and then we need to find the E and the C. So where can we find that in that area? So okay, we could try the E there at the 14th fret of the D string, and maybe the C up there at the 17th fret of the G string. Okay? So that's a second inversion C major, G, E, and C. Okay? So now we have root position, first inversion, and second inversion. Okay, so we're just working through the different inversions of that chord. Obviously, we can apply this to any other chord. So let's say we take an F major, which I'm playing here, starting at the 13th fret of the E string there. Same pattern that we had for the C there. Just shift it up, and then for the first inversion we're going to want the A in the bass, so there's the A, F and the C, and for the second inversion we're going to want the C in the bass, so I could move back down here and play my second inversion pattern. Okay, so again you can apply that to any chord. Next, let's try the same thing with the minor triad. So if we were to play the C major, to make the C minor, we just drop that E down to the E flat, which is the 8th fret of the G string. So there's my C minor chord. So 8th fret E string, 10th fret A string, and then the 8th fret on the G string. And I'm barring that first finger across to catch both the E string and the G string. C minor. So for the first inversion, we're going to want the third in the bass, which is going to be the minor third, which is going to be the E flat. So remember, the notes of that are C, E flat, and G. So let's look for the E flat. We've got one there at the 11th fret of the E string. And then we want a C and a G on the top. So there's our C, 10th fret of the D string, and there's the G at the 12th fret of the G string. Okay, so that's a first inversion C minor. And you can see it's same as playing the C major, but we've just dropped that third down, okay? So, root position, and then first inversion. For the second inversion, we do exactly the same thing that we did with the major triad. So we want a G in the bass, so I've got it there at the 15th fret of the E string. Then we want an E flat and the C, so E flat's there at the 13th fret of the D string, and the C up there at the 17th fret of the G string. So there's my second inversion C minor, so I can work through those. Okay. So that's the basic major and minor triads, and you want to try practicing those with various different chords, F minor, G minor, B flat minor, D major, whatever. You can try them in isolation, but obviously the most important thing is to try them in application, and towards the end of this lesson I will give you a little chord progression that you can try out that will give you them in application. So, next let's look at some 7th chords. So we're going to look at the major 7, the dominant 7, and the minor 7. So we'll start with the major 7, and we'll just start with a C major 7. So the notes in there are C, E, G, and B. It's a major triad. with a major 7th on the top. So let's have a look at how we could spread those out. So we could, because it's a 4-note chord, we could play all of those notes together. So C, and then the G, and then the B, and the E, but it gets a little bit mushy on there. So what we can do is miss out one of the notes. So the B and the E are the flavor notes in there, so let's just miss out the 5th, okay? And we'll still keep that sound, okay? So that's C, B, and E. So we've got 8th fret on the E string, and then we've just got the 9th fret on the D and the G string, okay? And, you know, it still sounds a little bit mushy down there, but if I take it up here to F, you can hear it's got that nice sound, okay? So that's a major 7 chord. Next, let's try a first inversion. So we're going to want to start on the 3rd, which is the E. So we've got the E there. And again, we could try it with all the notes, you know, on every string, which would give us E, then B, C, and then maybe the G on the top, which is a pretty hard fingering. You know, if you've got to try and get those fingers right around there, it's a bit of a stretch. So we want to take out a note at least to, you know, to make it so that we can move between the chords a lot more easily. So we've got the E there, so we've got the B here and we've got the G here. We could put that B down here at the 9th fret of the D string and then maybe play the G up there at the 12th fret of the G string, giving us that chord there. So that's E, 12th fret E string, B, 9th fret D string, and G, 12th fret G string. We could also shift that to play here, so we've got that B there at the 14th fret of the A string. Okay, so that's one way of playing this chord. We could also play the E, 12th fret of the E string, the B at the 14th fret of the A string, and then the C at the 10th fret of the D string, which would give us that kind of sound. Okay, but I'm going to stick with this one for now because we've got a little bit more of a gap in the lower 2 notes. So that's E, B, and G. Okay, so we now have C major 7 there and first inversion here. So in effect, I've played the major 7 first inversion pattern that we had before, and I've just shifted that root note down to the major 7th. Okay, so that's another way of looking at this. Think, you know, if you've got a good bass from your, you know, the major and minor triads, you know, you're used to those, you can just take out that root note and move it down, okay? For the second inversion, we're going to have to start on the 5th, so let's start on the G, which we've got there at the 15th fret of the E string, and then we can put the 3rd and the 7th up on the top, E and B, okay? So that's 14th fret D string and 16th fret on the G string. There's our second inversion, C major 7. So we have then, okay? Now we could even move up to the second inversion by playing the B in the bass. So that would be, let's say, the B there at the 19th fret of the E string. Then we could maybe try the E at the 19th fret of the A string, and then maybe the C up there at the 17th fret of the G string, giving us that kind of sound. But I'm not going to cover the third inversions for this. I'm just going to stick with the root position, first inversion and second inversion because they're a lot more usable. So we have the major 7, so now let's move on to the dominant 7. Now, if you know anything about chord construction, you'll know that the dominant 7 is the same as the major 7, but we've got a flattened 7th in there. So it's going to be, for a C7, it would be C, E, G, and B flat. So it's a major triad with a minor 7 or flat 7 on the top. So C, E, G, B flat. So let's try our root position, which is just going to be a variation on our major 7 there. We're just going to flatten that B down to the B flat there, 8th fret of the D string. So that gives us C, 8th fret of the E string, then the B flat at the 8th fret of the D string, and then the E, the E at the 9th fret of the G string. Okay, so you can hear it's got that bluesy dominant 7 chord sound. So that's C7 root position. For the first inversion, we're going to have the E on the bottom, so that's going to be the E there, 12th fret of the E string, and then let's have a look at how we can distribute the other notes. So we want that flat 7 in there, the B flat, so we could play that here at the 13th fret of the A string, and then we have a choice. We could either play the C in there somewhere, but let's just go for the G, okay? So that's going to be 12th fret of the G string, which gives us But actually, if you know it, if you've worked through the other chord lessons, you'll notice that that is actually a diminished chord. So it can be seen as a diminished chord, but we're just seeing it as a first inversion C7. And whether you hear it as that is going to, depend on context. Like I said, there's a multitude of different ways that you can voice any chord. So that's going to be our C7 for now. So we've got C7, first inversion there. So root position, first inversion. And now let's have a look at the second inversion. So we want the G on the bottom, so 15th fret of the E string. And then we can put the third and the seventh in, just as we did with the major 7, but we're going to have the B flat in there. So that's going to be the E and the B flat on the top. So G, 15th fret of the E string, and then the E at the 14th fret of the D string, and the B flat up at the 15th fret of the G string. Okay, so that's our second inversion, C7. So at every point, if you have a core, major and minor triad, and then maybe one of the 7th chords down, you can just see these others as variations. So when we played the major chord in root position and then added the 7th chord in there, we just, we've got that 7th, and then for the dominant 7, we just flattened that 7th. So you just get used to the different variations on any one of the patterns. And like with the major triad, the minor triad is just one note different. So you learn one chord, then you make a variation on that for another chord, and that goes into the toolbox, into the mental toolbox, and then you just gradually expand on each one. So that's the major 7 and the dominant 7, so now let's just add the minor 7 into the mix. So this is going to be, as the formula, root note, minor 3rd, perfect 5th, and minor 7th. So it's just a minor triad with a minor 7th in there. So for a C minor 7, we're going to have C, E flat, G, and B flat, okay? So the standard pattern that we're going to use for that down here would be C, 8th fret of the E string, and then the B flat there at the 8th fret of the D string, and then the E flat at the 8th fret of the G string. So again, it's just a variation on our other 7th chords here. So if you think about that dominant 7 we just played, we're just taking the top note down one. So really easy, all on the same fret, just E string, D string, and G string. Okay, so that's a minor 7. For the first inversion, we want to start on the 3rd, which is the minor 3rd there, the E flat. So we've got an E flat here at the 11th fret. And the voicing I'm going to use here is going to be a very familiar one. I'm going to play the flattened 7, the minor 7 there, the B flat at the 13th fret of the A string, and then catch the G up at the top at the 12th fret of the G string. And you may know that as the same as the voicing we used for the major triad. So we've got this major triad voicing I'm actually using for the minor 7. Now, obviously, there are many different ways that you can voice this. We could also try E flat, B flat, and then the C there, which gives us that voicing. But again, it's a little bit mushy. So we've got that, or we could even play both, put the G in there on the top. That would be the complete voicing there. E flat, B flat, then the C and the G on the top. But I'm just taking out that C there. Oops. So we've got these notes. So that's going to be our first inversion, minor 7. For the second inversion, we want to start on the 5th, the G. So we've got the G there, 15th fret of the E string. And then up on the top, we can play the E flat and the B flat. So that's 13th fret on the D string and 15th fret on the G string. So there's our second inversion, C minor 7. Okay, so root position, first inversion, and second inversion. So that's a few sample shapes for getting used to these inversions. And as I said before, there's a whole multitude of different ways that you could play them. The notes are the notes. How you distribute them, is completely up to you. But as long as the root note, the 3rd or the 5th, is on the bottom of the chord, the bass note there, that determines the function. That's going to be what determines whether it's first inversion or second inversion. However you distribute those other notes, that's going to be determined, let's say, by the melody maybe, various bits of context like the voice leading, you need to look at that while you're creating these little chord progressions. But now let's have a look at a little chord progression that you can use to see how these work in application. So here's the chord progression. So this chord progression is all transcribed there in the lesson material. So remember to, click on the link in the info below if you want to learn it. So I'm only going to, gloss over it by just showing you the actual, the chords that we're using in here. If you want to see the individual notes as you're working through, then check out that tab. So we begin with the C major chord. Okay, so we've got the C major triad. So I'm starting there at the 8th fret of the E string. Okay, so that's our starting chord, and for the picking pattern, you can use anything you want really. I'm just playing. So I'm just coming up across, E string, A string, G string, back down, and then back from the top, and then back up to the top again. So. Okay, and I'm using that little claw hammer technique there, so I'm pretty much using the thumb, the first finger, and the third finger with the occasional second finger. So that's the first chord, C major triad. Then we move to the second chord, which is going to be a second inversion, a G7. So this is all in C major, so this is the chord 5 with the 5th on the bass. And the good thing about this is that it's giving us a nice line in the bass. Okay, so we've moved up from the C up to the D. Okay, so it's still a G7, but it's got that D in the bass, which means we've got this nice moving line, which you'll see in a second. There's nice voice leading moving into the next chord. So okay, so we've got the D on the bottom there, and then we've got the B and the F up there on the top. Okay, so you just want to get used to that move, because if you've never played any of these inversions, that might seem like a bit of an alien move. Just try going between them. For the next chord, we have the first inversion, C major. So that's the chord that we played earlier on. So we've got E in the bass, and then we've got C and G up on the top. Very common voicing for that first inversion, especially on bass. So we've got E and then C and G up on the top. Okay, so remember this is all transcribed and tabbed out over at Talkingbass. So okay, so you can see how that bass line has moved up, C, D, and E, and that's the cool thing about inversions. Next we move to F major. So we've got the same shape that we had down here for the C major, but just there at F, okay? So that's the F, we've got the root note, 5th and 3rd up on the top. So F, C, and A. And then we instantly shift to the F minor. So instead of the A on the top, we shift it down to the A flat. So I've got that first finger there barred for that second part. Okay. So F major to F minor, and it's got that very familiar sound. And you hear that a lot on chord 4. We're in C major, F is chord 4, C, D, E, F. And that movement to the minor is a common move. Next, we just move back down to the C major first inversion, so we've got the E in the bass again. So you can see that for the bass line there, we've got C, D, E, then F, stays on it for the minor, then starts a descent again. We're back down on the C major first inversion, E in the bass. Then just shift that lowest note, the E, down to the E flat, and we have a C minor first inversion. Okay, so down to C minor. Then we're going to shift down to D7, which is a secondary dominant chord, a little bit of a chromatic chord in there. So D7, so root position. So we've got the D, and then we've got the C and the F sharp up there at the top. Okay, so that's the D7, and then we're going to shift, well, let's work through that. And now let's move down to the G7 second inversion. So remember, this is what we started with. We went C to second inversion G7. We're back there, which leads us back to our C. Okay, so. So as I mentioned, as I was working through those chords, the inversions in there facilitate this really nice movement in the bass. Okay, so we get this bass line working up, C, D, E, F, then E, E flat, D, and back to C. Okay, so C major, then up to the, we've got the G7, but it's a D in the bass, then up to the, back up to the C major, but we've got the E in the bass leading up, then to F major, root position, minor, we could just stay on the F, but then we start our descent again, E to C major, then we've got the C minor, so we've got that descent there with the E flat, D7, we're on the D coming back, then to the G, we stay on the D, and back so. That's our bass line, okay? So if I didn't play any of those as inversions, the chord progression would sound like this. We'd have C, G7, back to C, and then up to F, then F minor, and then back to C, C minor, and then D7 and G7, okay? So let's try that again. And then. So a lot of root movement there. We're moving larger distances, but now. And back, okay? So, great way there of using inversions to create smoother movement in the bass line. So you want to start out really slowly playing through that chord progression, and don't worry about playing it in time to begin with. You know, you just want to get the, the fingering right on this hand, and you want to get the finger picking down on this hand. And to begin with, don't even worry about playing a finger picking pattern. Just get the chord and play it. And you can play it as a broken chord like that, just roll the fingers across. Just get used to playing those chords one at a time. Like I said, don't worry about it being in time, then try the next one, then the next one. And you'll probably be, trying to, I've got to put the finger there and put the finger there and put the finger there, and eventually you'll get the chord and plong, That's how it works at first. Anybody that's learned guitar knows this routine, of trying to get the fingers there. But eventually, all of a sudden, the muscle memory starts to kick in and it'll just drop under your fingers, okay? As if by magic, okay? So you start out really slow, just playing them like this. Get the... and then, work through it that way. Once you have the chords under your fingers, then just start slowly with the finger picking pattern and then just build up speed. So you start out really slowly. And you'll find that you have to, accommodate the actual chord shifting as well. That's the tough part, You want to be able to do the shift, cleanly before you start putting in any different finger picking patterns. So that's inversions. They have a really cool sound and can make a big difference when looking to create a bit of variety with the voice leading and bass movement. So check them out, experiment with them, and I'll see you next week.